And Matthew Marshall, last but not at all least, has been the Redwood Coast Energy Authority's Executive Director for 12 years now, focusing on increasing Humboldt County's residents' awareness of and access to energy efficiency and renewable energy opportunities. Prior to this work, he was City and County of Denver's Greenhouse Gas Reduction Program Administrator, managing and leading greenhouse gas reduction projects and community partnerships in support of Denver's Climate Action Plan. He's president of the California Community Choice Association, and also serves on the board of directors of the Trinidad Coastal Land Trust, Redwood Parks Conservancy, and the Greater Eureka Chamber of Commerce, among other things that he manages to keep going. He plays the bagpipes and enjoys making art, and is assistant chief of the West Haven Volunteer Fire Department. And now he's got 2 kids, and he's been a really busy guy and a little short on sleep. So we welcome all 3 of you, and thank you for coming. All of the rest of you who are here, Michael, is all yours.
Okay, great. I'd like to share my screen. So the county and the cities pulled together an effort to develop a regional climate action plan that would cover not only the unincorporated areas, but all the cities as well. And let me try to advance. There we go. Where we left off with the cities was in May, where we wanted to make sure that they were comfortable with beginning the environmental review of the draft cap. And they gave us their blessing on that. And so that's where we're at right at the moment. I'm going to go backwards a little bit and just give you some of the background first before we get into the current status of where things are at. The idea of this effort is to develop a regional climate action plan, which would be adopted by each of the jurisdictions, and we collectively will reduce our greenhouse gas emissions throughout Humboldt County in a way that's consistent with the state targets. Here's kind of a schematic that shows, or a figure that shows the steps towards a climate action plan, not only developing the climate action plan, but also implementing it. And so we began by developing a greenhouse gas inventory, and RCEA, Matthew's organization, was instrumental in helping us do that. They interviewed all the cities and identified appropriate measures to implement, and developed numeric values associated with each of those measures to identify the quantity of carbon dioxide emission reductions associated with each of these implementation measures. We did some reaching out to the cities and also to the public in a series of workshops. And through this interaction, we set some goals and identified some draft actions. And that's where we're at essentially right now. Is we've developed this draft. We're in number 3 there. And we've developed this draft, and now we are having it evaluated in an environmental impact report. And after that, the cities will take this draft and make it their own. They will put their stamp of approval on each of their own chapters, and the county will do that as well. We're targeting the end of next year for completion of that effort. And then the hard work begins, where we start to obtain resources to implement the measures in the climate action plan and take those measures and track and report those actions and the quantity of CO2 emission reductions that have actually occurred. And then you feed into back into number one again, where you redo the inventory based on these new measures that everybody has taken, and you refine those measures over time, and you're hopefully, on a path to not only meeting the state goals, but actually reducing our greenhouse gas emissions such that our planet is maintained in a healthy place. There's a couple of different targets that are available. 2020 target was we want to achieve 1990 levels. That was achieved. A bigger target is by 2030 we want to get to below 40% below 1990 levels, and that's the primary target of this climate action plan, is to try to get there. And then the state has put this ultimate target in front of us, which is by 2045, we're going to be net zero greenhouse gas emissions, period. So we've, as I mentioned, we've set our sights on hitting that preliminary target of 40% below 1990 levels by 2030. And here are the different GHG, greenhouse gas emission reductions from all of the different climate action plan measures in the draft cap at this point. You can see most of them involve electrification of the existing infrastructure. And we've got some new information that was presented to the Board of Supervisors just a little while ago, several weeks ago, from PG&E that really puts a cloud on the feasibility of achieving that those sets of measures. But nonetheless, that's what is in our draft climate action plan at the moment, and so we're going with that. The second largest reduction is going to come from zero emission passenger vehicles. This is obviously something that's already occurring and really being pushed by the state and by the auto industry. There's not a huge amount of work that we can do except to set up the infrastructure, the charging infrastructure, to facilitate conversion of fuel-based to electricity-based vehicles. And then the next highest is, or the next largest reduction is going to come from zero emission freight vehicles. And once again, setting up electric charging stations in a pattern that's well distributed throughout the county will help make that happen. Here's a quick rundown of the timeline that applies to this climate action plan. We began in 2018 with an agreement from all of the cities, and I just want to give a shout out to the cities to express my gratitude for them participating in this. They've really done a great job of coming to the table on a consistent basis to really hash out some really technical and challenging measures. And the draft climate action plan, which is posted on the county's website, is reflective of all of their hard work. And so I'm just super impressed that we've been able to achieve the success that we have so far. I think it really speaks to the ability for us to work as a team moving forward. So as I mentioned, we launched the effort in 2018, did that inventory and the forecast, and developed the measures, and selected them and developed the narrative for the climate action plan. In April, we released the public review draft, and we're now in the process of evaluating that in the form of an environmental impact report. And then ultimately, later on next year, we'll be in public hearings with each of the jurisdictions, trying to push it across the finish line. And that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to go to any questions and answers, or Emily, I think, is ready to jump in with her presentation. And I did kind of want to put a pin in one of the issues that has recently become apparent, is that the distribution and the transmission and the distribution capacity for Pacific Gas and Electric infrastructure is not where it needs to be in order to support the climate action plan to the extent that we would like to be supported. And what this means is there's some investments that need to happen on the part of PG&E that are, some of them are being made and are imminent of completion, but some of them are ways off. Like, for instance, there's a lot of businesses down in southern Humboldt that are waiting for approval from PG&E for upgrades to their electrical service, and those approvals are being withheld, and it's really questionable what the time frame is for delivery of those enhanced electrical services by PG&E. And so, for instance, our reliance on full electrification of homes in the southern Humboldt area is going to be compromised by the lack of capacity in the distribution and transmission lines. Likewise, in Fortuna and Rio Del, those cities are going to have challenges in the near term in meeting those objectives, those implementation measures in the climate action plan. And PG&E has a plan to invest several millions of dollars to get those cities into a place where they can achieve the results that we're looking for. But it's going to take time. And so there's work to be done. And frankly, I don't know that our climate action plan can wait for PG&E to do the work they need to down in southern Humboldt. We may be able to get there with Fortuna and Rio Del, but those areas in southern Humboldt are just going to be kind of left out in the cold in a lot of ways. And so we need to figure out what a game plan is for addressing those capacity issues from the PG&E's infrastructure. And I can talk more about that, but I'm happy to hand it over to the very competent and capable Emily Benvie at this point.
Thanks, Michael. Yeah, I'll jump in and maybe we'll hold questions and answers till the end, just in case I start to address some in sort of my piece, and then Matthew subsequent to that. So I don't have a PowerPoint prepared, but I did want to talk a bit about today some of the Arcata specific measures, as well as actions that the city of Arcata is already taking or begun to take. So Michael provided a really great high level overview of what the climate action plan or the CAP is, and sort of how that process will flow. And I wanted to take a little bit more of a close-up look. So if you can imagine, Michael provided the 40,000 foot view, and I want to provide a little bit more of a on the ground view of some of the measures that are most directly applicable to the city of Arcata, or at least not directly applicable, but the most impactful for the city of Arcata, and how the city is already beginning to implement some of those measures. So with that, I am going to share my screen to briefly orient with this CAP measure spreadsheet. So this is a very complex Excel spreadsheet that some consultants had prepared, EIAS, and they had prepared the spreadsheet that distills all the various different implementation measures down for each jurisdiction. So you can see I'm dropping down here. There's all the jurisdictions located within Humboldt County, as well as the unincorporated area. And so focusing on Arcata, this measure spreadsheet has the SB 32 target, which Michael had discussed at the beginning. And it shows that with the implementation of the measures outlined here, to the degree that they have been proposed, gets the city to 100% achievement of meeting that SB 32 target. And what I will say is it took probably close to 2 years to develop this spreadsheet in a way where city staff felt comfortable with the feasibility of meeting this target. And I bring that up just to share that it really, it has been a challenging task to meet the SB 32 target in a way that feels possible and achievable. And saying that through the lens of, city staff has been very aggressive and ambitious in how we might be able to meet our greenhouse gas reduction targets. So I won't go through all of these measures right here. You can see there's a lot of them. There's complex. It probably isn't the most impactful thing to talk about in too great degree of detail. But I did just want to highlight sort of that piece in the process and how we were looking at some of our greenhouse gas reduction implementation measures. So taking a little bit more of a broader stance, there are several broad greenhouse gas reduction goals outlined in the climate action plan. And what I did is I looked through the measure spreadsheet for Arcata and pulled out some of the most impactful measures themselves, and which I want to talk about a little bit now. So as Michael had alluded, one of the most impactful measures is replacing gas-powered vehicles with electric vehicles. Another goal is mode shifting from single occupancy vehicles to active and sustainable mass transit models. In addition, transitioning from fossil fuels in building and commercial industrial, transitioning from fossil fuels in buildings and commercial industrial processes. Supporting, this is a very Arcata specific measure, but it's supporting Cal Poly Humboldt in their implementation of the Cal Poly Humboldt Climate Action Plan. And then, as Jane had alluded to in her introduction of me, establishing diversion and compost programs. So those are some of the high level, more impactful goals for reducing greenhouse gas reduction, for reducing greenhouse gases for the city of Arcata. And again, this climate action plan hasn't been adopted yet. The environmental review is in process, but the city is actively moving several of the implementing measures forward that are outlined in the climate action plan, because we realize that, the climate's not going to wait for us to adopt a plan. We need to start doing that, or we need to continue doing everything we can to mitigate and adapt to the impacts of climate change. And so with that, I thought it would be helpful to outline some of the specific Arcata focused projects that we have and how those projects fit within that overall framework of the climate action plan. So one is Arcata has an electric bus. We received that as part of our infill, the acronym is IIG. I believe it is Infill and Infrastructure Grant Program, but there was a development in downtown Arcata part of that development brought money from the state, and we were able to purchase an electric bus with that. For our municipal fleet, we purchase electric vehicles as often as we're able to. When we are retiring our old gas vehicles out, we're starting to bring in the electric vehicles as much as we're able to, as well as starting to transition our small equipment away from gas powered and starting to understand what electric powered small equipment and tools can meet our needs as we start to phase out our gas equipment. We have installed electric vehicle charging stations for the broader community at the community center, as well as the F and 8th Street parking lot. And both of those were in partnership with RCEA. And we continue to partner with RCEA in looking for additional opportunities for electric vehicle charging stations. Shifting more to the active transportation lens, as many of you probably know, Arcata's portion of the Humboldt Bay Trail has been completed. Gosh, it's been a long time. I want to say we completed that in 2017, though it could have been 2018. Time's been a blur these past few years, but that section of the Bay Trail has been completed, and that extends essentially to Braycut. And so the intent is when the county finishes their portion, we'll really have a commuter separated transportation corridor for active commuters between the Humboldt Bay area. We also have recently completed our Arcata Ridge Trail, which runs from West End Road to Sunnybrae, and that is a trail within the forest. So it's not a commuter trail necessarily, but it is a way of moving across the city limits from north to south. And we just had our ribbon cutting ceremony for that within the last month. So that is a new completion. And we are currently heading into the design phase next calendar year of the Indian Mary Trail, and that will connect Arcata to Blue Lake. So Arcata's portion will go to Mad River Pump Station 1, and it will start essentially at the skate park, if you're familiar with that location. And what I will say is the skate park in Arcata is where our Bay Trail starts. So in essence, the Bay Trail, when completed, will go from southern Eureka all the way through Arcata, and it will continue from the skate park toward Blue Lake. And so really being able to connect the various municipalities of Humboldt County in an active transportation way that is safe and approachable for a number of different active transportation types and commuters. Transitioning away from transportation, I wanted to talk a little bit about electrification in buildings, or I should actually really say decarbonization of buildings. The City Council has a goal that Arcata adopt an electrification ordinance by the end of this fiscal year, which would be in July of 2023. And that ordinance would prohibit natural gas in new construction. So essentially it would require that all new construction be all electric. We're in the process of drafting that. And with the prior building code cycle, we actually have REACH codes, which in essence required greater electrification standards than the building code has required. That REACH code ordinance ran with the building code cycle, and so it has since lapsed. And so the intent is this electrification ordinance will apply in perpetuity, and it really will require that new construction be all electric. There are several nuances to that ordinance itself, but that is definitely the take home. And I do anticipate that that will be adopted before the end of this fiscal year. Through a city facilities lens, we also look to maximize decarbonization opportunities within our existing and new city facilities to the extent possible. So some projects that we have in the works right now we are working with RCEA on securing a loan through the California Energy Commission for rooftop solar at our community center. And with the installation of that rooftop solar, it will be able to serve all of the current electricity needs for all of our meters at that community center complex, which includes the community center, the sports complex, our parks maintenance shop, as well as the parking lot lighting and electric vehicle charging stations. In addition, we're working to electrify the community center building itself. So recently our gas water heater went out. And so we replaced that with an all-electric water heater. We're also working on lighting efficiency upgrades that will run with the loan that we are seeking through the rooftop solar. So that will help to reduce our electric load. And then as time and funds allow going forward, we're also wanting to fully electrify that entire building through switching out our gas cookware appliances, as well as switching out our gas heat to become an electric heat pump. Those will be some longer projects, but our city council has allocated America, I'm forgetting my acronyms again. American Rescue Plan Act funds, ARPA is what we call it, some funds to decarbonize city facilities, including helping to fuel switch the community center. Speaking a little bit about the city's relationship with Cal Poly Humboldt, and more specifically their climate action plan, I do sit on a Humboldt Advisory Committee on Sustainability, and that is sort of a nexus where the city can represent the city's voice on a advisory committee focusing on sustainability in the campus that also includes interfacing with the climate action plan. And then the last piece I wanted to touch on, as I mentioned before, and as Jane had alluded to, is the diversion and compost programs. So SB 1383 is a state mandate, and it requires many things. I won't spend too much time talking about it here, but part of what it requires is that municipalities start to develop and require universal curbside collection of compost, of organics, and then processing those organics into compost. And the reason why I'm bringing this up at the climate action plan lens is because the intent of the law is for methane emissions reductions, because methane is one of the most potent greenhouse gases that we're faced with, and organics in the landfill causes enormous methane emissions. And so the city council has gone through a first reading of a mandatory organics ordinance that will require universal curbside collection of organics. The second reading is scheduled for this Wednesday. There is a caveat to that, which is that the ordinance will not be in effect, or it will not be enforceable until we have the infrastructure whereby we can collect and process the organics, which we currently don't have anywhere in the region, really, to the extent that it is needed. And so to work toward that, the city is also working as a member of Humboldt Waste Management Authority to develop a regional pre-processing facility for organics. We're also working with Recology, our franchise hauler, as well as community composters, to start to develop the hauling, to be able to haul the organics once the pre-processing facility is developed. And currently, we're also selling compost bins for backyard composting at discounted rates to Arcata residents. So if you have a backyard and you'd like to compost, you can get a discounted bin, and that will help reduce your personal methane emissions. So I'm going to leave it at that. Again, just really wanted to speak more specifically to some of our greatest opportunities for greenhouse gas emission reductions, as well as the ways that Arcata is already implementing several of the measures as outlined in the climate action plan. And I will stop there and hand it off to Matthew.
Yeah, thanks. And as you noted, there seems to be a good flow of questions coming in. So maybe I'll try to go efficiently so we have time for Q&A at the end. Let me share my screen here. Slide so I'm going to kind of talk on a little bit more about sort of the implementation side of things and things that we're working on that support climate action on the both the customer side as well as sort of the upstream side of meeting our needs with local renewables. If you're not familiar with RCEA, we're a local government joint powers agency of the county and all the cities as well as the water district. And our mission is to develop and implement sustainable energy initiatives that reduce energy demand, increase energy efficiency, and advance the use of clean and efficient renewable resources in the region. And I think those three pieces are sort of, sort of fundamental to when you're thinking about climate action and reducing emissions. They're sort of like using less, using what you need efficiently, and then having the supply of that energy be from renewable sources to reduce emissions. And so the classic example is first conservation, turn off the lights if you don't need them. The second is being efficient when you do need to use energy, and so having energy efficient lighting when you are using it. And then the sort of third element is using renewable power to meet your needs for the energy you use. And so we always sort of say you have to sort of eat your conservation efficiency vegetables before you get your renewable energy dessert. And so even though this is a simplified example, it's like doesn't take too long to say, well, wait a minute, we're talking about lighting. The sun is not out generally when you need lighting. And so even in this super simple kind of standard example, you start getting into the complexities of addressing this by saying, well, okay, do you have energy storage so that when you're needing energy in the evening hours, you're able to, to use that stored solar energy? Are you having a blended portfolio of resources so that when the sun's not out, you've got other things like wind or hydro to supply your energy needs? So, even the simplest example gets complicated. And I think the same framework holds true when you think about other sectors. So like thinking about transportation and, some of the things that Emily was talking about, when you think about conservation, it's how do you reduce the need to use energy to get around, and obviously having, walkable communities. If you live close to where you work, you don't need to commute. You don't need to use energy to get to your workplace. If you do need to commute, you can be efficient in how you get there. Like this guy on an electric bike, so he's using a fairly low energy, still using energy, but not too much to get his commute done. And then obviously, if you're using a vehicle that's consuming energy, whether that's a bus or an e-bike or a car, are you powering it with renewables? And so, this kind of comes to the point, when we look at, our Humboldt County emissions, transportation's the elephant in the room, the biggest source of greenhouse gas emissions. Natural gas is a big one as well. The electricity sector in California is quite low emissions compared to places that rely on coal. And so, we're already doing pretty good on the electricity side, and that's, continuing to be, a lower and lower source of emissions. And so when we look at, well, how do we get these other sectors, our natural gas usage and our transportation off of fossil fuels and to renewables, I think that's where electrification really comes in. So you can use renewables directly, obviously, to dry your laundry or to move a boat around or to, grind, a mill wheel. But for the most part, we're going to need to look at, okay, for our cooking needs, I don't think we're going to go back to cooking over, wood stoves. And so it's really looking at, if we're going to get off of natural gas, we need to electrify those types of applications. Same with water heating. And then for transportation, getting our vehicles when we do need them, whether that's a car or a bus or a truck, to be able to use renewables. You can't have hydrogen fuel, you can't have like renewable, biodiesel, biofuels, but for the large part, a lot of that really comes down to electrification of the technology. Even hydrogen is generally, you're creating electricity with a fuel cell instead of from a battery. So I wanted to kind of talk about, the programs we have and sort of on the customer side of things of, different ways to sort of touch on those. I'm not going to get into a ton of detail, but, we our sort of bread and butter activity since we were founded is really providing, energy efficiency and conservation technical assistance, and then particularly, rebates for energy efficiency. We've been doing that for years. We have free consultations that we provide to homes and businesses. And then we have, a suite of rebate programs for energy efficiency measures that customers are able to take advantage of. We have a solar net metering program for people that want to go solar and generate power, on the supply side. The way we do that is similar to PG&E, except we offer a larger credit for the surplus generation that customers produce. And then, as part of that, we actually pay customers out if they overproduce. So if you're producing extra, more than you needed, we'll cut folks a check every year. We do that, and I forgot to pull up this year's numbers because I had this in an old slide. But previous year we issued about a $250,000 of payments to solar customers for their surplus power generation and that they provided to their neighbors. So again, talking about the sort of integration of renewables, we are launching a new program in partnership with a company called Swell that provides incentives for customers that want to install battery systems at their home or their business. And basically, if they're willing to sort of allow those home storage systems to be used to provide grid benefits, then we'll provide an incentive. So, when you put a storage system coupled with your solar array on your home, one, you get backup power because solar by itself won't provide backup power if the grid goes down. But so adding storage enables that. But it also enables you to balance of when you're producing your solar with when you're needing it, and then can also provide grid benefits by being able to provide power when it benefits the broader grid, not just your own personal usage. So that's a new program that'll be offering customer incentives. And then, on the electrification front, we've rolled out a whole suite of residential and commercial rebates for heating system water heaters, panel upgrades, because sometimes for older homes, you need to upgrade the electrical panel. And so we have quite a robust amount of funding available for people interested in electrifying, because again, that's one of the biggest bang for your bucks as far as greenhouse gas reduction. And then we're also providing additional rebates on top of what the state provides, as well as the tax credits that are available for electric vehicles. And so that's helping to buy down the upfront cost of electric vehicles. As mentioned, we're working with our member cities and other businesses and entities across the region to help get public charging infrastructure available, although most people charge at home or at work sometimes. But and so I didn't put like specific dollar numbers on these because it's always changing, and it's harder for me to like try to get it right. Then the next week we increase the rebate amount, or rebate pot gets expended. So for people interested in any of these kinds of programs, the best place to start is just to go to our website and fill out the interest form, or give us a call at our office here in Eureka, and we can kind of see what folks are interested in, whether it's a home or business, and sort of walk them through the programs that would be relevant to them and their interests. And so kind of thinking on the big picture side of it, of, well, okay, if we're transitioning to renewables, and we're electrifying our transportation and our heating needs, how do we do that locally? I think folks are hopefully aware, but if you're not, we're the community choice energy provider for Humboldt County, and so we're responsible for the supply side of electricity. So we have local control through that program of where our electricity is coming from. PG&E still owns and operates just somewhat disappointing results in some regards, and maybe not quite what we would hope to see them delivered on as far as maintaining the infrastructure. But for better or for worse, they still own and operate all of that, and handle the customer billing. And so it's sort of a hybrid public power model with PG&E still as the distribution entity. And in case you're not aware, this is becoming a pretty dominant model in the state. So all these green counties and the yellow ones are either being served by CCAs or about to be. And so about, I think it's over 11 million people in California now are served by CCAs. We're one of the smallest ones actually as far as population base. When you look at like LA County, City of San Diego, San Francisco, East Bay, Silicon Valley. And so our local goal is really to maximize the use of local renewable energy to the greatest extent possible, while still providing competitive rates at or below what PG&E would otherwise charge customers. We've been able to achieve that rate goal since we launched the program in 2017, and we're working on that maximizing the local renewables part every day. I started this with an offshore wind slide, and so that's one of the big opportunities. We're not the sunniest place in the country, but we are off the coast, the windiest place in the entire United States. And so the darker the blue, the more wind you've got. And as you can see, Southern Oregon, Northern California has the best wind resource in the entire country. The technology to deploy that off our coast is now reaching commercialization, because we need to have floating foundations for Humboldt, because the water gets deep. So most of there's quite a lot of offshore wind in Europe, and increasingly on the East Coast and other parts of the world. Most of that is fixed bottom, actually like standing on the seafloor wind farms. And so, until the last few years, California, because of our deep water, didn't really have a lot of opportunity for offshore wind, and that's really changed. This is a picture of a a project off the coast of Portugal, you know, and there's increasingly floating wind farms going in the North Sea off of Scotland, and so we're seeing the floating foundation technology kind of hit full commercialization in Europe, and that's allowing things to move forward here in Humboldt. The pink area is the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, BOEM's lease area. We've actually been, you know, at RCEA, been working on offshore wind since before BOEM was interested in it, and you know, going back to actively 2016 when we were going to launch the CCA program, you know, in part of our community outreach back then. You know, folks wanted to see, you know, us explore offshore wind as a potential because of the resource, and so based off of that goal, actually in 2018, we before BOEM identified a call area, we proposed a leased area because they have an option for doing that, which is that green area that they basically absorbed into what's now the area that's going to be leased. And as far as next steps, the lease is tomorrow, so starting I think 7:30, you know, it's East Coast time, but anyway, the lease auction for both the Humboldt area, which has 2 different lease blocks, and then there's another 3 down off of Morro Bay. Those 5 lease areas will be auctioned tomorrow. So either by the end of the day tomorrow, or sometimes these auctions go for multiple days. But sometime the next day or two, we'll see which developers have been successful in securing those lease areas, and also how much they paid for them. You know, after that, that's really just providing site control to those developers, and so that's when the permitting process, which you know will take at least probably 5 years, if not longer, you know, of environmental monitoring, and then you know actually proposing a project and project design and going through the approval and permitting process. So this leasing stage is, well, it's a big milestone. It's really just giving the developers the right to just start doing those studies to pursue permitting. So we're still kind of early in the process, even though we've been working on this for a number of years. And then just other renewable projects that we've got in the works. You know, looking locally, there's the airport microgrid, which I'm talking about a little bit, which we own and operate. We've got a number of other projects that are either storage, solar, or solar plus storage in the works that we have. You know, contracts for the development with the respective developers or in negotiation. And then we also have some projects that, you know, we've got in the works that are not local. The biggest is a 100 megawatt solar project, which is like very large. You know, the airport project, if you see that array, that's 2.5 megawatts of solar. So multiply that by a lot to get 100. And then we've also got other non-local battery storage projects that and new geothermal that we're contracting for. A lot of that has to do with meeting state mandates and procurement requirements that we have to comply with at the state level for both grid reliability and emissions reductions. And then the airport microgrid. So that's the first big, you know, new solar project that's come online, and it's been a big partnership with the folks at the Shot City Research Center, as well as PG&E and the county, which is the host for the site. And with funding from both RCEA and the state of California, that project's up and running, and so it's a good example of you know, it's a solar project and it's a storage project, so we're able to provide solar power when the grid needs it by coupling those two together, and then also by doing that, we're able to provide resilient backup power for the airport and the Coast Guard Air Station. And this is kind of a cutting edge system because it's front of the meter, multi-customer. So it's not like a single customer's array. It actually is powering a whole branch of PG&E's grid. And you know, that includes the Coast Guard and the airport. When we go into island mode, if there's a natural disaster or a grid outage, you know, this system can power those facilities for extended periods of time. And I think this is the kind of system that we're looking at doing more of in the region. You know, I saw some questions come up about Southern Humboldt, and I think, you know, these types of systems could be part of the solution to providing power in local communities. And I think, you know, I just want to end on, you know, as we're decarbonizing and trying to, you know, get off of fossil fuels, we really need to do that in a way that maintains and enhances energy resilience. Because we can't sort of say, well, we address climate change, but now our community is at risk because we have unreliable power. You know, we've compromised our ability to respond to emergencies. I think the airport project is a good example of how you can have your cake and eat it too, and that you can decarbonize, but you can actually enhance and improve energy resilience and have a much more robust system rather than compromising that by transitioning off of fossil fuels. And I threw this up here just because the new the electric Ford F-150, which a lot of people drive trucks in Humboldt County, in case you haven't noticed. That's a fully electric vehicle, and so it has high performance, and I think people that are truck drivers are going to like it. But one of the things that they've designed into that is it's actually able to use the battery system in the truck to provide backup power, and so you could use it to run your refrigerator in an outage, or and so I think that's something. My brother, who's a microgrid engineer and a lot smarter than me, actually did that with his electric vehicle and his solar array. So instead of installing a home battery system, he configured it so he can basically use his car battery as the battery system coupled with his solar to keep his critical things on in his home, like his refrigerator and some basic essential stuff. And so I think from the customer level all the way up to the big scale, we want to bake in resilience and emergency response capabilities as we're getting off of fossil fuels and addressing the climate crisis. So that's my last slide, and I will stop screen sharing so we can get to the questions.
We have quite a number of questions. With PG&E, who has the ability to pressure PG&E? Is it the Public Utility Commission that has to basically say, hey, PG&E, you need to have your investors maybe not have so much money and put it into infrastructure? Or can they be asked or required to partner with like SOHUM in order to build microgrids? Do they do this kind of partnering?
Yeah, so the Public Utility Commission is the entity that regulates them and has oversight. Obviously, the state legislator can you can have things out of Sacramento that say thou shalt do this, but then ultimately that's going to be implemented by the CPUC. So that's where the rubber kind of meets the road. On the note of their shareholders, and it's kind of actually the opposite as far as the issues in Southern Humboldt and them not having upgraded the infrastructure. That's actually how their shareholders make money. So if you're a PG&E shareholder, you get a return on investment based off of what they spend on infrastructure investment. And so it's actually the issues with Southern Humboldt are bad for investors, and it's like, oh, they didn't do work that would have made money for the shareholders. So I've heard there's actually like some shareholders that are saying, hey, what are you guys doing? Why didn't you do this work that's obviously a problem for the community that would have also like resulted in profits for shareholders? So it's kind of, I think if I have to speculate, it really just comes down to their sort of bandwidth to do the work, as well as just having the cash capital to do it upfront. They've been through bankruptcy a couple times now, and they're actually just in the process of selling off or trying to sell off like 49% of all the generation assets they actually own. So like the Humboldt Bay power plant that they actually own and some of their hydro projects that they own, they're trying to spin off a new company and basically sell 49% of the stock in that new company to raise cash. And so I think just with a lot of the fire hardening work they're doing in other parts of the state, I think they're perhaps just spread thin, and that's not really a good excuse. It's maybe an explanation, but in this case, shareholders are being shafted as well as us. So that's not the root cause of it. And so lastly, I think those kind of distributed solutions, that's something that we're definitely interested in looking at. Okay, if PG&E can't upgrade some of these lines to meet customer needs, can we do something more localized? And the good folks at PG&E that we worked with on the microgrid project that are part of their grid innovation teams are part of like trying to figure out how to address these Southern Humboldt issues beyond just kind of like the traditional transmission upgrade kind of work. And so the right people at PG&E who have been good partners on the microgrid project at the airport are involved in trying to figure out a solution for Southern Humboldt.
Is the new CEO an improvement overall in terms of reacting to needs?
I have not seen a dramatic difference. Certainly, that was kind of touted,
Can always help.
Yeah, we met with her when she first came on board as far as the CCA community. So we had a meeting with her and talked through kind of CCA issues. And I would say we haven't exactly seen much different. It's a big ship to turn. So even if somebody's well-meaning, it might, maybe it's too soon to say in the long run. But.
And then who is preparing the draft EIR for Climate Action Plan? Has that already been let out as a contract, or?
We've got 4 proposals that we reviewed, and we selected one of the consultants, and we're in negotiation with that consultant.
So to be continued.
That's right.
Sometime soon.
That's
Okay. Are we recommending local solar grids or rooftop solar to address PG&E?
Yeah, that's kind of what I was getting at. So the answer is yes. Yeah, and there might be, that's some of the grid constraints. Could do a whole brown bag on that. It's Southern Humboldt's where kind of stuff hit the fan, but there's other parts of the county that have, grid constraints. Basically, the entire sort of Koopa, Orleans, which part of the county. Has grid constraints, and actually like northern Arcata. So like the distribution lines that serve Cal Poly Humboldt, for example, say no new capacity, no new potential. So it's not unique to Southern Humboldt at the distribution level. Now, upgrading some of those local lines in Arcata is probably going to be a lot easier task than dozens of miles of high voltage transmission lines. But it is something that is an issue, and certainly in more remote areas, those kinds of distributed systems might be the only solution.
Yeah. Are the new electrical loads projected in SOHUM all firm, or are some speculative, for example, cannabis grows, which I suspect is the answer?
Yeah, so I don't know, Michael, you want to talk about that? Or
yeah, there's probably a collection of both. There's quite a few projects. There are 72 customers specifically that are waiting for upgraded facilities from PG&E, and so those are the firm ones. And then there's others that would hope to expand into the future if those facilities are available. And so there's a combination of the two.
Thanks, Michael. Anyone know what the prospects are for hydrogen technology on the North Coast to help meet the goals of the Climate Action Plan?
Yeah, I think it's electric vehicles are currently much more widely available and generally have sort of better round trip efficiency, because again, if you're using hydrogen, for the most part, you're going to be generating, you're taking electricity, making hydrogen with it, and then converting the hydrogen back to electricity to power a motor in a car or a bus or whatever. And so it is it's something that if you can just use the electricity straight, that can be a little bit more efficient. That said, there's still advantages, particularly for large vehicles like buses and things. And so I think there's still potentially a role for hydrogen for certain applications, whether like just passenger vehicles will kind of become the norm. It's likely that electric vehicles will probably kind of stay the standard there, just because they're generally going to be more efficient to run. But time will tell. And
is Schatz working on hydrogen at all?
Yeah, and they were sort of world leaders in hydrogen. I think it's less of a focus than it was. you know, I think it's still an area that, you know, has a lot of potential. You know, and the Humboldt Transit Authority got a large grant to get some hydrogen buses, and so that'll kind of, I think, provide sort of an anchor tenant that might sort of spawn additional opportunities. Because if you start having the fueling infrastructure, obviously, you know, the nice part about electric vehicles is there's an electric charging station in everybody's, you know, living room. You can plug into any wall. Now, not that, you know, larger, you know, faster charging isn't handy. With hydrogen, obviously, you have to build new fueling infrastructure that could be quite costly. But because of that HTA grant, that could open up, you know, other, you know, fleet operators and entities to look at, you know, being able to switch to hydrogen.
Assuming we are able to implement the organics recycling, how much impact will that have on gas emissions? Will it be substantial? I have no idea what percentage of emissions it causes.
Yeah, that is one of the measures in the climate action plan, and we've identified a goal of 14,848 metric tons of green waste being composted, and that's by the year, or on an annual basis, by 2030 is the goal here. So seems like a lot of green waste to me, but I'm not really familiar with the scale to know how difficult a challenge that's going to be.
Thank you. Had the TerraGen project been approved, didn't PG&E have the infrastructure to handle that? Why wouldn't the infrastructure be enough to serve Soham?
Yeah, so it has to do with which lines are impacted and constrained. And so again, I could do a whole brown bag on this, but the TerraGen project was going to tie into a particular substation and then be you know, flowing around the county, out of the county. A lot of the issues, some of the issues are transmission based, that PG&E's having, and some of them are distribution based. So it's like, if you look at the grid, there's big high voltage transmission lines that are like your highways, and then you've got substations that are like your off ramps, and then you've got distribution lines that actually go out to individual customers that are like the city streets and county roads. So PG&E's having issues at all of those levels, but the transmission line that's causing the Southern Humboldt issues, the transmission line that's part of those issues, is not the one that, you know, really was fundamental to the TerraGen power kind of coming onto the grid. And so it's a pretty small transmission line that goes south from Eureka and then down sort of through the Eel River Valley and down into Mendocino County. And so that's the transmission line that's got issues. It's not one of the larger ones that goes in and out of the county from Eureka to closer to Redding. And then the other issue is the distribution level, which again is more like, you know, your city street level, and that's where some of the problems that they've said are probably unfixable in Southern Humboldt just because of the geographic area and, you know, the costs involved for a very small number of customers is challenging. So it's you know, the TerraGen. That's a long way of saying the TerraGen project was dependent on different transmission lines that are causing the issues in Southern Humboldt.
Okay, thank you. Sherman asks, my understanding that not all electric vehicle manufacturers have compatible plug-in requirements. If this is true, how does this affect the ability to implement charging stations?
They basically all do except for Tesla. So Tesla has like a proprietary charger, but they have adapters, so Tesla drivers can use the standard. But there's a standard plug. It's called like a J1772 plug, and so all the vehicles besides Tesla are standardized to that. And then, you know, Tesla drivers just have an adapter they can use. There was two sort of different charging connectors for like fast charging. So these are like the high power chargers that can like charge in, you know, minutes, not hours, which generally isn't what you need. You know, you're usually charging your car like you charge your cell phone. It's like cars are sitting there the vast majority of the time, so you can plug it in, it can charge at night, can charge while you're working. But if you do need kind of a rapid charge, like on a road trip or something, there used to be 2 different connectors for that, but one of them's, I believe, basically won out and is going to be the standard connector for that. So
Thank you. Lawrence asked, does the new solar farm at Sun Valley have a power purchase agreement yet?
yes is the answer. So yeah, I would say it was at our September board meeting, my board approved us entering into a power purchase agreement with that. And one of the things that we bring up is the power purchase agreement step is often earlier in the process than folks would imagine, in that there's 3 approvals you need to build a renewable energy project, whether it's TerraGen or this project. You need approval to connect to the grid, which is either PG&E or for bigger projects, the California Independent System Operator. So you need to be able to, connect to the grid and get approval to do that. You need to have somebody willing to buy the power so that you're able to go out and get financing, and you have an off-taker and you know what you're going to be able to get, so the project is economically viable. And then the third is you need, planning approval, just like anything else. And so, you have to go through the permitting process. Often those first 2 stages will happen sooner rather than later, because they need to figure out what the economics are to see if the project's even viable to be able to move forward and try to get it permitted, or if they find that you've got to scale the project down, that can, result in different prices. So they'll often kind of go through the interconnection process, although that can be challenging sometimes with PG&E, and the sort of the procurement side of it first. And then they'll say, okay, now that we've got a viable project, let's spend the money on doing our permitting. So when we contract for a project like this, it's that, there's milestones where it says, well, you need to get your permits by this date, and you need to do this by this date, but it's sort of like it's a tentative agreement to buy it if they get approval. Since we're obviously not the land use planning entity, and that's really the county's jurisdiction. Basically, our contracts say, go get approval. Like with TerraGen, for example, so we had one of these power purchase agreements where he said, well, if you're able to build this, then we would be an off taker for the power, but ultimately they didn't get approval at the permitting level, and so and sometimes we get damages and stuff if they fail, as far as
Are there incentives for installing heat pumps?
Yes, we have a lot of incentives, and I didn't put dollar numbers up because, like I said, they're kind of changing all the time, but we have pretty massive incentives for heat pump systems, which that's on our webpage too.
How will collected compost methane be collected?
I think the focus at this point is on developing the regional infrastructure to haul and then in a central area collect the compost, and then to digest it and to sell it. And I'm not sure what sort of methane production will be, what sort of collection facilities will be necessary at the point of collection. So that to be determined.
Thank you. Can you discuss the variety of solar facilities available versus simply rooftop solar, that is solar tiles, separate off roof options, solar ovens? What's coming down the road, and are the costs coming down and the efficiency up?
Yeah, I'm not like an expert on like different kinds of panel technologies. I would say the efficiency and the costs have greatly improved. Back when we were doing our like Repower or Humboldt like regional energy analysis with the folks at the Shot Center, it's like even while we were doing that report, we kept having to update all the tables because the price of solar was just coming down and down and down. And so now solar is quite affordable, and I think there's certainly like different technologies and things coming out. I would say it's not really necessary to use anything other than what's conventional to be cost effective. So not that there can't be new interesting things, and some of that's like like for the airport, we use what's called a bifacial panel at the airport. So those panels actually can generate power from the backside. So like as light reflects off of the grass, and on cloudy days, you get a little bit more production. So it's more efficient because it can catch ambient light both on the back and the front of the panel. But I would say, if there was an area where there's kind of like at the residential sort of home scale, heat pumps have come a long way. And so that's, as that's becoming really, a state level priority, there's a lot more options. It's still kind of can be tricky sometimes to find a contractor that's doing the work. And that's one of the things we're trying to work on, is get more contractors engaged on doing the work. Because it's like, we can have a massive rebate, but if nobody's doing the projects, nobody's stocking the equipment, the rebate doesn't really help. And so, we want to see that work go to local contractors and not have people have to hire somebody from outside the area to come and install a heat pump water heater in a business or something like that.
Are you going to have a recommended list of contractors like you did with other aspects of?
Yeah, so we're a public agency, so we don't like recommend a particular business and say, oh, these guys are great, and these guys, but we do support having like qualified, like, hey, these guys are permitted to do the work, and they've met they understand our rebate program, so that they make sure that they don't install something that then you're not eligible to get the rebate and things like that. So we do have sort of support with selecting a contractor, but ultimately we're not in a position to kind of endorse one, since that wouldn't be a good thing.
Oh yeah, I understand that. There was a list last time.
Yeah, so we'll have like a list of like, hey, here's people to call, so you don't have to just sort of like leaf through the yellow pages kind of thing. And so that's something that we want to kind of build up as more contractors start doing heat pump work.
And Sherman asks, how do you make convenient, cost-effective mass transit work in the low-density housing environment we have, compared to high-density big cities with much larger populations that can thus afford successful mass transit?
Yeah, Emily might have some ideas on that, but basically what it involves is for development that's occurring in the county to incentivize the development to go into areas with centralized public water and sewer services, and then to do what we can to incentivize development within cities where public water and sewer infrastructure are available. And those are the two measures that are in the cap. And we're actually we just applied for a grant to fire up a regional housing trust fund that would take money from all jurisdictions and identify the prime targets. And that could be across jurisdictional boundaries to provide more incentives, deeper incentives to place housing where it makes sense.
Is that part of the controversy around the Indianola project?
That is part of the controversy. It's some people consider that to be in an area that's well served by transportation infrastructure. Others say not so much, and so that'll be a part of the discussion moving forward with that project.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry. I was just going to say, chiming in a little bit from the city's perspective, it is inherently really challenging. There is no silver bullet for designing mass transit in a rural area that is heavily utilized, and we'll never be able to compete with, say, New York City, just because we're not New York City. But what I will say is prioritizing infill development, adding stops in convenient locations. City of Arcata partners or works with Humboldt County Association of Governments on more regional transportation needs and assessing and optimizing routes, increasing efficiencies, and then certainly we work locally as well. There have been several surveys and studies to understand how to best meet the community's needs, because it's one thing to have the infrastructure in place, but there's also increasing the ridership, and so it's a two-way street, no pun intended. But you can build a really good bus service, and really it is important that people start to utilize those services. And so what are the barriers, or how could it be more convenient for folks? And so I personally don't work a lot in that space. Our engineering department does a really great job job of working through Arcata Mad River Transit, as well as through the broader transit authority and partnership with Humboldt County Association of Governments. But I would say, it's definitely something that is continually being looked at and evaluated, and opportunities for improvement. And it is really challenging, is the bottom line.
Yes, you have to maybe get developers to provide passes as part of the deal in order to get people to use them, and offset, give these passes instead of having parking spaces, right?
Well, it's tricky because it's like public transit does two different things potentially. There's providing mobility for people that don't have any other option, or might even have limited mobility physically, and so then you want like maximum coverage in the most stops, so that somebody that's elderly that can't drive doesn't have to go a long way to get to a stop, and doesn't and is going to be able to get to their doctor's office or whatever. And that's kind of very different than like commuters, where you're just trying to in an urban area where you've got a big downtown, you're just like, all right, have park and rides, whatever, in the suburbs, and then just rocket people into the downtown. And it's hard to have one system do both of those. But if you're not an urban area, it's hard to be able to afford to have both the coverage type service as well as the 3 stops and then you're downtown, rapid type service that blue collar workers are going to look for, or white collar workers are going to look for.
Yeah. Have PG&E's attempts to lower their rooftop solar credits been rejected, or do they keep trying? And are they requiring a minimum monthly cost for solar users now?
So it's up in the air. The CPUC officially scrapped the previous thing they had put out, which had a lot of pushback, and they just rolled out a new proposal that did do away with some of the minimum fee thing that was, I think, one of the worst parts of what they had proposed before. That's still that just came out like a week ago, pretty recently. I've been sick for a couple of weeks, so I've lost track of time. But and that's being considered at the CPUC right now. Now, last time the governor kind of stepped in, and we'll see what happens this time. But it's back under consideration, but in a better format than it was. And again, it's still being debated. So it's what's on the table right now is not necessarily what the final decision will be.
Does it basically still include the disincentive of having a minimum?
No, so it doesn't have like the tax or whatever, like you pay no matter what. Like I because I was out sick, I haven't had a chance to read the full thing in detail, but it still doesn't provide what currently you get for your surplus, like net generation. So if you're generating the daytime and then using in the evening, it's much less of a financial benefit to a customer to do that under the new rules. But I believe they've done away with the flat fee kind of surcharge.
Disincentive, yes.
Yeah.
Benjamin asked a question for Emily and Mike. What part of the cap do you think would most benefit from targeted community input, a targeted community input process, something on the level of the Gateway Plan? How could structured community processes help shape rollout and resolve potential conflicts among community stakeholders? Boy, that's a biggie. Who wants that one?
Well, I could start, and maybe Emily can follow up. One of the challenges for the county is we've got so many rural areas that are not really spoken to in the measure selection that is proposed in the cap. For instance, the increasing transit ridership, increasing the mode, or changing the mode shift out of single occupancy vehicles, even the electrification of homes and installation of charging stations is is put in jeopardy by this recent revelation of the capacity and distribution and transmission facilities by PG&E. And so having a public conversation and a lot of engagement around how to help the rural property owners and dwellers contribute to the greenhouse gas emission reductions is, I think that's a huge challenge for us, and we are going to need significant civic engagement to arrive at a set of tools that's not only acceptable but productive.
And how do you plan to arrange that or incentivize that public input?
Yeah, well, the EIR has a series of steps that includes public engagement. There's a notice of preparation where we do some scoping about what are the impacts, the environmental impacts associated with the project, the climate action plan that should be analyzed in the EIR, and so that'll be the first kind of release of the call to public engagement. But then also I think we just need to start working with the community, and we haven't done that yet, but that'll be close on the heels to that notice of preparation, or could even precede the notice of preparation.
And actually, I'll add to that. I'm going to share my screen just because I have a presentation up from City Council that I had shared in May of this year. We have actually done quite a bit of public outreach and engagement to develop the draft climate action plan itself. It has been a while because that plan is now drafted, and so we're moving forward in the environmental review phase, which Michael had talked about, and the public outreach associated with that. But really, we had a number of presentations, workshops, focus group, targeted stakeholder meetings to come up with potential measures to select for prioritization. And so this slide right here shows, probably not all, but at least a good portion of the public engagement that has been undertaken since about 3 years ago now. Time flies. So just wanting to speak to that there really has been quite a bit of public engagement already, and there will continue to be. And I think that some of the engagement will continue to take place through the lens of the CAP, the Climate Action Plan, and some of it will be through implementing some of the measures outlined in the Climate Action Plan. So for example, there needs to be general discourse and community buy-in for the concept of electrification of buildings and understanding the capacity for distribution of that electricity. But also taking that Arcata specific lens, for example, if Arcata develops an electrification ordinance, there's going to be outreach around that specific ordinance in and of itself, in addition to outreach that would happen through the CAP. So I think that, while there will be CAP specific education and outreach, there's also going to be a lot of different offshoots for community input process and buy-in, and the gateway was brought up as well. Part of the Climate Action Plan outlines the importance of infill development and mixed uses in downtown areas. And so the Gateway Plan is in effect helping to do that. And so I think really it's having that understanding of how all these various different projects and programs and plans are occurring, and how they all sort of are intersectional with the Climate Action Plan itself, in addition to doing additional stakeholder engagement surrounding the Climate Action Plan just as a standalone document. So just wanting to make connection that the CAP isn't operating in a vacuum. It's really quite integral with a lot of other things that are already happening in the community, and a lot of discourse that's already happening.
Thank you, Emily and Michael. Some jurisdictions are placing solar arrays on closed landfills. What about here? Do we have where do we have closed landfills in the county?
Yeah, there's the Cummins Road landfill, kind of inland, and we've talked about that. One of the things that it needs to have like depending on how big you're trying to go, like, is there a grid infrastructure to tie into? Since there isn't necessarily big power lines going to a landfill. And so we've talked about assessing that, as a potential.
Thank you. We bought a $150 inverter via Costco to use our Bolt with our Bolt to keep our critical electric power going, refrigerator, etc. It's been one of the best investments we've made. What are the roles of inverters?
So that's, what will let you plug a regular, like, AC, standard plug into, your car. So, cars got like the old cigarette lighter that's not an AC current. And so some electric vehicles actually have a built-in inverter, so you can like press a button. Like my wife's car, there's a button where you can press, so there's an outlet in the back. So like when the power goes out, you can run an extension cord and just plug it directly in. But if you don't have that, it's basically something that converts your cigarette lighter to run an AC plug.
Thank you. A large productive wind farm generation project is going to require major investment with grid improvements. Any idea on how the numbers will work out and who will foot the bill for the grid improvement investment? I've heard numbers to the tune of $3 to $6 billion. Also, what is the realistic time frame for this sort of infrastructure upgrading?
Yeah, so to do anything more than like maybe 10 or 15 turbines, you're going to have to upgrade transmission out of Humboldt County. You could do those first 10 or so at sort of a community scale, and then the power would generally just be used locally, and that can be done without major transmission upgrades. That might happen sooner rather than later. The timeline for transmission upgrades is generally about 10 years, and there's a state sort of iterative planning process. The California Independent System Operator ultimately plans and decides where transmission gets built, which is a state level entity that you probably never heard of. Most people haven't, but they're the ones that actually manage the grid. And then as far as who pays for that, that process gets paid for by everybody. So it would be ratepayers of California that ultimately pay for those kinds of large scale transmission upgrades. So we'd all pay a little bit, but we wouldn't be, it wouldn't be a local cost. If there's things that are specific just to like one developer's kind of project, then they pay for some of that just as part of the project itself. But if it's things that are benefiting a project, but also the broader big, new transmission that's providing other benefits, then that gets paid for at the state level.
Are other jurisdictions preparing caps as well, and are they required by the state? How does Humboldt County's progress on our cap compared to others?
Yeah, there are quite a few jurisdictions in the state that are preparing climate action plans. And how do they compare to ours? I would say that there's not a whole lot of communities that are proposing this regional approach like Humboldt County is taking. There's a couple, but not a whole lot. And so that's one area of difference. And to me, that provides a strength where we're able to pick and choose using the strengths of each of the jurisdictions to achieve a mix of measures that is really cost effective and as efficient as possible. And so I think our approach is a superior one. The proof is in the pudding. We haven't had it approved. We haven't got them all approved yet, and they haven't been determined to meet the state targets. And so we'll see how that all shakes out over the coming year.
Thanks, Michael. And Kathy Chandler Klein asks, how much of the electricity from the wind array will stay here? Can it replace our use of natural gas?
Yeah, so I think, like I said, if we have a sort of a first smaller phase, or, whether that happens, right out of the gate, the first 10 turbines, however soon or not soon they are before the rest of the turbines, would really be about, local load and would be sort of scaled to what, energy would end up being ultimately consumed locally. That full like wind energy area, if that was built out to kind of its full potential, that would be, greatly more power than what we would use locally. So, we would be a net exporter of renewable energy, and we'd be contributing to like state level climate goals, not just meeting our own energy needs at that scale. So.
And David Steinhardt asks, how many charging stations are envisioned for Arcata Eureka by 2030? Is there any potential for small businesses to buy, install, and charge for the use of charging stations? In other words, what do the poor gas stations do?
Yeah, so go ahead.
I can give you the numbers. In our climate action plan, we include specific measures for this, and we've got a goal of 246 what they call L2 plugs installed. Those are the long-term, the longer duration charging stations, and then also 83 L3 plugs installed. And these would be available to the public. And then we also have 5,296, almost 5,300 home charging stations installed by the year 2030.
Thank you. Are emissions effects of forest sequestration and management practices calculated under agriculture? Where would we find discussion of restoration, conservation, and preservation actions as opposed to technological infrastructure and resilience measures?
Yeah, the climate action plan describes how carbon sequestration could be used to help us achieve our climate action goals. We've been told by researchers that probably Humboldt County, if you were able to quantify the sequestration that is occurring, Humboldt County is probably already at net zero emissions, but those calculations, those methodologies are really tricky. And so our climate action plan has a goal of doing that math in the future, but we couldn't get there with this current draft.
Thank you. And Kay Escarda asks, the PCUC is currently considering the revised plan, which is still a solar tax plan promoted by PG&E and SoCal Edison. The federal tax is about $14,000, but the California tax credit would only be about $7,000. In addition, it slashes your net metering credit. Not a good deal for incentivizing more people to do rooftop soil. Is that correct, Matthew?
Yeah, so that we kind of talked about that, is that the
I know you mentioned that, but
it's reemerged. I think this is a good time to mention as far as the federal tax credit stuff has been re-upped, and they've actually expanded some of that. And so that one thing I didn't mention in my slides is the Inflation Reduction Act had a whole lot of energy. I mean, despite its name, it was really more of a climate action bill, and not perfect, but quite remarkable considering the lack of general federal action on this. And there's quite a lot, both on the tax credit side as well as potential sort of rebate type programs. And so the rules of how that's all going to be rolling out is still kind of coming in bits and pieces. But yeah, while the news at the CPUC level and the state level is sort of looking less than ideal, although again, it's not a done deal yet. The federal incentives have been enhanced in many ways for climate action kind of measures, from heat pumps to everything. And again, we're waiting to see how that exactly rolls out as far as the rebate type stuff.
I hope we've addressed all the questions. There are all the ones that are in the chat we have addressed. So I want to thank you, speakers, for all your preparation and all your work on this and spending this time with us, because there's obviously a lot of interest and a lot of concern. And So I do thank you, those of you who are speakers and those of you who came. And I want to mention that our last talk for the year is next Monday, and it's on the Affordable Housing Challenge with Chris Dart, who's president of the Danco Communities, and with Elizabeth or Beth Matsumoto, who's director of the Multi-Family Development Rural Communities Housing Development Corporation. That's a mouthful. Anyway, it should be very interesting, and we'll look forward to seeing you here next week again, and hope you'll join the last class if you get a chance for this year. And wishing you all a very Merry Christmas if you don't happen to come back next time. And do join OLLI. We need all the support we can get. We need to bump our membership up. So this is one of the benefits we provide, the additional funding that everyone contributes provides for the community, and all these talks and all the people who give the talks at no charge. And we provide this at no charge. So thank you so very much. We look forward to seeing you next week. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.